The television studio of Europa News Tonight was designed to project authority and sophistication, with its sleek modern set, carefully positioned lighting, and backdrop that suggested both gravitas and contemporary relevance. The show prided itself on conducting serious interviews with major political and cultural figures, and tonight's guest was expected to be one of their most watched segments of the year. Cristiano Ronaldo had agreed to appear on the program to discuss his charitable foundation's latest initiatives, but the host, Isabella Martinez, had other plans for the direction of their conversation. Martinez was an experienced journalist who had built her reputation on asking difficult questions and pushing high-profile guests beyond their comfort zones. She had spent years covering international affairs and had developed a particular expertise in Middle Eastern politics, which she believed gave her the authority to challenge public figures who made statements about complex geopolitical issues. Tonight, she saw an opportunity to confront what she viewed as Ronaldo's increasingly vocal support for Palestinian causes, and she had prepared what she believed would be a devastating line of questioning that would force him to backtrack or appear politically naive. The interview began routinely enough, with Martinez asking standard questions about Ronaldo's foundation work, his upcoming matches, and his thoughts on various social initiatives. Ronaldo answered thoughtfully and professionally, clearly comfortable discussing topics that were close to his heart and well within his areas of expertise. The conversation flowed smoothly through discussions of youth development programs, education initiatives, and healthcare projects, with Martinez maintaining the friendly but probing tone that had made her a respected interviewer. But as the interview progressed, Martinez began to shift the conversation toward more controversial territory. "Cristiano," she said, her tone becoming more serious and pointed, "you've been quite vocal recently about supporting Palestinian causes, calling for an end to what you've termed the occupation, and criticizing Israeli military actions. Your statements have generated significant controversy, with some arguing that you're taking sides in a complex conflict without understanding all the factors involved. How do you respond to critics who say that athletes should stay out of political issues they don't fully comprehend?" The question was carefully crafted to put Ronaldo on the defensive, suggesting that his support for Palestinian rights was somehow inappropriate or uninformed. Martinez clearly expected him to either moderate his positions or to stumble when pressed for details about the conflict's complexities. Instead, Ronaldo's expression grew more serious, and he leaned forward with the intensity that usually appeared on football pitches. "Isabella," he said calmly but firmly, "I want to be very clear about something. When I see a people living under military occupation, when I see children prevented from going to school because of checkpoints, when I see families losing their homes to illegal settlements, I don't need to be a political expert to recognize injustice. I need to be human." The directness of his response clearly surprised Martinez, who had expected either defensiveness or political hedging. Instead, Ronaldo was doubling down on his support for Palestinian rights with a moral clarity that left little room for the kind of equivocation she had been hoping to provoke. "But surely you understand," Martinez pressed, "that Israel faces legitimate security concerns, that they've been the target of terrorist attacks, that the situation is more complex than simply calling it an occupation. Don't you think your platform requires you to acknowledge these complexities, rather than taking what appears to be a one-sided position?" Ronaldo's eyes flashed with something that anyone who had watched him compete would recognize as competitive fire. "Isabella, let me ask you something. If someone came to your neighborhood, forced your family from your home, bulldozed your house, and built their own house on your land, would you call that a complex situation requiring both sides to be heard? Or would you call it theft?" The analogy was simple but powerful, cutting through the diplomatic language that usually surrounded discussions of the conflict to expose the fundamental injustice at its core. Martinez shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly not expecting such a direct challenge to the narrative of complexity that she had been prepared to deploy. "That's an oversimplification," Martinez said, but without conviction. "The historical claims to the land are disputed. There are legitimate arguments on both sides about territorial rights, and the security situation requires... Stop, Ronaldo interrupted, his voice carrying an authority that filled the studio. Just stop with the diplomatic language that makes theft sound reasonable. When Israeli settlers take Palestinian land, build homes on it, and force Palestinian families to leave, that's not a territorial dispute. That's colonization. When the Israeli military kills Palestinian children and calls it self-defense, that's not security policy. That's murder. The studio had fallen completely silent. This wasn't the careful, diplomatic celebrity response that Martinez had expected to challenge. This was someone speaking with uncompromising moral clarity about issues that were usually discussed in euphemisms and abstractions. "You're making very serious accusations," Martinez said, her journalistic training causing her to push back even as she clearly recognized that her usual tactics weren't working. "Are you saying that Israel has no right to exist? That Israeli security concerns are illegitimate?" Ronaldo looked at her with an expression that mixed disappointment with determination. "I'm saying that Palestine has a right to exist. I'm saying that Palestinian children have a right to live without fear of being shot by soldiers. I'm saying that Palestinian families have a right to live in their ancestral homes without being forced out by settlers backed by military force." He paused, his voice growing stronger. "As for Israeli security concerns, let me ask you this. How secure would you feel if someone stole your home and then demanded that you accept their theft for the sake of regional stability? The Palestinians aren't threatening Israeli security by existing in their own land. Israel is threatening Palestinian existence by occupying their land." Martinez was clearly struggling now, having prepared for a different kind of interview entirely. But what about Hamas attacks? What about terrorism? What about the rockets fired into Israeli cities? Don't these actions justify Israeli military responses? "Let me be very clear about something," Ronaldo said, his voice calm but carrying absolute conviction. "I condemn violence against innocent civilians regardless of who commits it. But let's not pretend that Palestinian resistance to occupation is equivalent to Israeli occupation itself. When you imprison an entire population, when you control their water, their electricity, their ability to travel, their access to medical care, and then call them terrorists when they fight back, you're not seeking security. You're seeking to justify oppression." The interview had completely transformed from what Martinez had intended. She had planned to challenge Ronaldo's political positions and force him to moderate his stance, but instead found herself facing someone who was willing to state uncomfortable truths about Israeli policies with a directness that she had never encountered from a major public figure. "You're essentially calling Israel an apartheid state," Martinez said, making one final attempt to get Ronaldo to backtrack from his positions. "Are you prepared to defend such a serious accusation?" Ronaldo didn't hesitate. "Isabella, I don't need to call it apartheid. Human rights organizations around the world, including Israeli human rights groups, have already documented that Israel operates an apartheid system. They've shown how Palestinians face different laws, different rights, different justice systems than Israelis living in the same territory. The evidence is overwhelming if you're willing to look at it honestly." He leaned forward, speaking directly to the camera. "But let me tell you why I speak out about Palestine. It's not because I'm anti-Jewish or anti-Israeli. It's because I believe that justice delayed is justice denied, and the Palestinian people have been denied justice for over 70 years. I speak out because I've seen Palestinian children who dream of playing football but can't access proper fields because of checkpoints and walls. I speak out because I've met Palestinian athletes who can't compete internationally because they're denied freedom of movement. I speak out because staying silent about oppression makes you complicit in that oppression." Martinez made one last attempt to challenge him. "But don't you worry about the consequences of taking such a strong political stance? Don't you fear alienating fans or losing commercial opportunities?" Ronaldo's response was immediate and decisive. "Isabella, I've learned something important in my life. Your conscience is more valuable than your comfort. If speaking out for Palestinian rights costs me sponsors or fans, then those weren't relationships worth having." History will judge us not by how successfully we avoided controversy, but by whether we stood with the oppressed or stood with the oppressors. He continued, his voice filled with passion. When I was young and people said I would never succeed because I came from a poor family on a small island, I learned that sometimes you have to fight against systems that are designed to keep certain people down. The Palestinian people are fighting against a system designed to erase them, and I will always stand with people who are fighting for their basic human rights. As the interview concluded, it was clear that something unprecedented had occurred. Martinez had intended to moderate Ronaldo's positions, but had instead provided him with a platform to articulate the strongest pro-Palestinian stance ever expressed by a major international celebrity. The interview became a watershed moment in the discourse around Palestine, with Ronaldo's uncompromising support for Palestinian rights inspiring other public figures to speak more boldly about the issue. In the days that followed, the interview generated massive global attention, with Palestinian communities around the world expressing gratitude for Ronaldo's willingness to use his platform to speak truth about their situation. Israeli officials and supporters condemned his statements, but their criticism only served to amplify his message and spark broader conversations about Palestinian rights and Israeli policies. The interview became a defining moment in Ronaldo's career, remembered not for any athletic achievement, but for his moral courage in speaking uncomfortable truths about one of the world's most contentious issues. It demonstrated that sometimes the most important victories happen not on football pitches, but in television studios, when someone with influence chooses to speak for those whose voices have been silenced by decades of oppression and injustice.